So imagine this. You save a tiny crying octopus one day, and years later she comes back as a gorgeous monster girl who instantly decides you're her future husband. Meanwhile, you're just trying to survive your 40-year-old teacher salary. Let's get into it.
In the middle of a vast sea, there was a tiny island where a small octopus eagerly waved its tentacle, hoping to answer the teacher's question about snow. The teacher, a middle-aged man, went on to explain that snow forms when water is both generated and condensed simultaneously. This kind of magic, which involved the activation of two phenomena at once, was considered A-level. He mentioned that if the students started practicing, they might just be able to make it snow one day. As soon as he finished explaining, the curious octopus turned to the teacher, ready to spill its deepest thoughts. The little octopus confessed that when it grows up, it wants to become human. This desire was praiseworthy and even encouraged in the class. But the octopus didn't just want to become human for the sake of it, it wanted to become human so it could marry the teacher. With that in mind, the octopus propped its head up, staring dreamily at the man. However, another little creature in the class wasn't too thrilled about this bold declaration. She also had her heart set on marrying the teacher. The teacher, slightly taken aback by where their aspirations were heading, couldn't help but question the students further, trying to clarify the details of their rather unusual ambitions. The little octopus stared at her tentacles and felt a wave of insecurity wash over her. She thought she was just too different from humans, and to make matters worse, she feared the teacher might dislike her because she was a monster. The more she dwelled on this, the more her body began to tremble, and tears welled up in her eyes as she imagined the worst, thinking that he would hate her and leave her behind. Noticing her distress, the teacher felt a pang of sympathy. He gently cupped her cheeks and whispered reassuringly that he would never do such a thing. Lifting the octopus up, he thought this was the perfect moment to share everything he wanted to say to his students. Many years passed, and things had changed quite a bit. In the heart of the Medium Kingdom, a towering structure that resembled a castle now stood, surrounded by a sprawling town with multiple levels. This was the Munis Inium Academy. After a long day of lessons, the students were utterly exhausted, their only desire being to get home as quickly as possible. Two girls, busy packing their things into their briefcases, briskly made their way to the main doors, chatting about their plans for the day. Suddenly, one of them bumped into a man. It turned out to be a teacher, his tie haphazardly stuffed into his shirt pocket. Realizing his mistake, he quickly apologized and asked if the student was okay. But when she saw who she had run into, her face went pale. Her eyes darted nervously, and sweat began to form on her forehead. Grabbing her friend's arm, they bolted from the scene, clutching their belongings tightly. As they fled, she shouted to her friend about the horror of running into old Washio, and how she couldn't stand his ancient smell. Washio sighed heavily as he overheard their harsh words but managed to maintain an awkward smile. He didn't consider himself old at all. He wasn't too thrilled that they had changed the kanji in his name to invent new nicknames for him. After all, he was only a little over 40, and there shouldn't have been any old man smell since he wore fresh clothes every day. As Washio trudged down the hallway, staring sadly at his clothes, something caught his eye. A stunning girl stood before him, a massive suitcase behind her, glancing around as if looking for help. Her beauty was so striking that it seemed she could enchant anyone with just a look. But as a teacher, Washio knew he couldn't let himself get carried away by such thoughts. With a quick slap to his cheek, he pushed aside all unnecessary thoughts and decided to help the lost-looking student. It was the first time he had ever seen her, but what puzzled him more was why she had such heavy luggage at the academy. Realizing that asking about her luggage might be awkward, he opted for a different approach. Washio asked why she was standing still and offered to guide her to the right classroom. The girl looked at him in surprise, and before he could react, she suddenly hugged him. Washio was completely caught off guard. He stood frozen in place, unable to reciprocate the hug. His thoughts grew even more suspicious as he noticed other students in the hallway squinting at him and whispering to each other. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, Washio politely asked the girl to let him go before the situation escalated, but she didn't budge. After a few more awkward minutes, the girl finally pulled back and, with a desperate tone, begged Washio to show her the way to the principal's office. She explained that she had forgotten to take a map of the school and had gotten lost. Washio, still trying to keep his composure, told her that the office was on the 4th floor and suggested she consult the identification book, which had a map in it. Determined, the girl crouched down and started rummaging through her suitcase, hoping to find her student ID. But things went wrong. Her suitcase was filled with clothes and hygiene items, not the school essentials she was searching for. She blushed and apologized, explaining that the suitcase was supposed to be delivered to the dormitory, but something had gotten mixed up. Now she had lost both her ID and her map. Seeing her on the verge of tears, Washio took a seat across from her. He gently stroked her head, trying to comfort her like a parent would. He reminded her that everyone makes mistakes when they're in a hurry, and that staying calm would help her find a solution. His words seemed to work. The girl stopped crying and even managed a small smile as she listened to his advice. Once she had composed herself, she thanked him, realizing that if she lost her ID, she could simply request a new one from the academic affairs office. As Washio let go of her hair, she began to fix it, though she seemed a bit annoyed. She whispered to herself to stay calm and avoid mistakes, as if repeating a piece of ancient wisdom. Washio's gaze softened as he watched the girl, who had been so desperately seeking help just moments before. He couldn't help but reflect on his past as an office worker, where he had always tried to stay positive, even when things went wrong. But his moment of nostalgia was cut short when he noticed the girl staring at him in surprise, clearly confused by his rambling about his office job. Realizing he was getting off track, Washio quickly apologized for his silly comments and said goodbye, trying to leave on a pleasant note. Washio picked up his clipboard, his feet dragging sluggishly as he went about his errands. His frustration was written all over his face, so much so that the girl he had just helped felt a pang of guilt for being a burden with her luggage. She sighed, placing a finger on her chin, wondering if he had even remembered her. Meanwhile, Washio had already entered the teacher's lounge, where everyone else was busy with their own tasks. Most of the staff didn't really see him as a coworker, and while they enjoyed their breaks, he was the only one who continued to slog away behind piles of paperwork. One of the teachers, Lin Noah, took advantage of Washio's kindness, magically poking him with a stack of questionnaires that he should have been doing himself. Lin Noah was notorious for dumping his duties on others, but Washio wasn't in the mood to take on extra work. He tried to excuse himself by claiming he would be cleaning classrooms today, hoping to escape the additional burden. But Lin Noah wasn't having it. He plopped the papers down on Washio's desk, advising him to come up with a better excuse next time. Lin Noah, who was quite full of himself, believed that such tedious tasks were beneath him and perfect for someone like Washio. He bragged about his responsibilities with the Louvre Division of Magical Studies, where he had managed to organize a tournament without a hitch. The director had naturally started to take pride in the club's success, all thanks to Lin Noah, or so he claimed. His endless boasting gave Washio a headache, but he knew he couldn't do much about it. With a tired rub of his head, Washio decided to give it one last shot to get rid of him. He replied perfectly calm that it would be an honor to help such a talented teacher like Lin Noah. The moment those words left Washio's mouth, Lin Noah's eyes sparkled with contentment. Thinking he had won, he quickly headed for the door, leaving Washio staring after him, puzzled by what made this man tick. Lin Noah paused before exiting, throwing a sneer Washio's way, as if to remind him who the pathetic one was. He knew Washio wouldn't fight back, and true to form, Washio was always the last one to leave the school. Today was no exception. By the time Washio got off work, it was late at night, and the stars were already burning brightly in the sky. Exhausted and hungry, he found himself stopping in front of a pub. The loud voices of people ordering food and drinks inside tempted him to go in, but he reluctantly passed by the brightly lit sign. His wallet was empty, and indulging in such a luxury was out of the question. So, he trudged forward through the dark streets, heading home. His house wasn't far, and it didn't take long to get there. Washio tried to sneak up the creaky stairs quietly, hoping to avoid waking anyone, but as soon as he reached the top, an elderly woman, the landlady, appeared behind him, greeting him kindly. Startled, Washio hadn't expected to wake her, and he was a bit confused by her sudden appearance. But she hadn't come out for no reason. She had brought him some leftovers from the table for dinner. Grateful, Washio thanked her sincerely and apologized for the inconvenience. He was about to continue to his room when the landlady asked why he couldn't find a wife to welcome him home with freshly cooked meals. Washio forced a smile, pretending the question didn't bother him. Everyone knew that for a low-ranking teacher like him, such a luxury was out of reach. The landlady didn't argue, merely confirming his statement before wishing him good night and retreating to her room. As soon as she left, Washio's smile faded, and his heart sank. There was no point in lingering on the stairs, so he continued up to the second floor. His room was a mess, with empty liquor bottles strewn about, but it didn't seem to bother him. Without even bothering to take off his shoes or clothes, he sat on his bed, clutching the bundle of food in his hands. The landlady hadn't just given him scraps, she'd made a delicious vegetable sandwich. He savored every bite, and once he finished the last morsel, he lay back, feeling the heaviness in his body that had accumulated over the day. The landlady's words wouldn't leave his mind. The idea of getting married seemed simple enough, but in reality, it felt like an insurmountable challenge. The more he thought about it, the more complicated it seemed. Frustrated, he abandoned the thoughts and began to undress, heading to the shower. Under the warm water, his mind began to drift back to his past, memories flooding in without him even realizing it. Over a decade ago, Washio was just a simple office worker with no hope for advancement. He had no girlfriend and spent all his free time playing video games. After work, he'd come home and lose himself in collections of famous quotes, trying to find some meaning in his ordinary life. It was so uneventful that he often dreamed of escaping to another dimension, a fantasy that surprisingly came true. One day, he was summoned to a new world where he was hailed as a legendary hero. His duties as a hero weren't glamorous. He wandered through destroyed villages, hoping to find survivors, but luck wasn't on his side. The only life he managed to save was that of a huge black spider, which leaned on him in gratitude. Determined to keep the creature alive, he protected it with all his might. Unfortunately, not everyone saw the spider as something worth saving. Someone eventually captured it and subjected it to horrible experiments. Washio's eyes widened in horror when he saw the spider trapped in a giant flask, tubes attached to its body. The sight was so terrifying that he jolted awake in bed, struggling to distinguish between nightmare and reality. He sat there, drenched in cold sweat, hands covering his face, but no amount of wiping could erase the haunting memory. The burden of failing the people who had counted on him weighed heavily on his conscience. That's how he ended up as a mere professor at the academy, far from the heroic life he once imagined. Trying to shake off the memories of those terrible events, Washio stepped out onto the balcony for some fresh air. After everything that happened, he tried to start anew in this world, but it didn't lead to anything remarkable. He hadn't even managed to get married. As he lit a cigarette, he reflected on his accomplishments, or lack thereof in this world. In his own eyes, he was just an average old man with a bit of magic. The only bright spot in his life was the time he spent with his students, like the little octopus. Those moments brought a smile to his face, and he could replay them in his mind for hours. They were, without a doubt, the most fun he'd ever had. With a sigh, he stubbed out his cigarette on the balcony railing, tossed it in the trash, and headed back to his room. It was time for bed, and thankfully, the nightmares didn't return, making the morning arrive quicker than expected. After a restless sleep, Washio grabbed the first clothes he could find and rushed to the academy. He made it just in time, though he looked a bit disheveled. Lenoa, ever the critic, stood up when he arrived and asked if Washio had even bothered to wash his shirt before leaving the house. Washio inspected his clothes and asked if they really smelled that bad, prompting Lenoa to cover his nose with a handkerchief. Before Washio could respond, the principal appeared, silencing the room with his presence. He began his speech, mentioning the arrival of a monster girl at the school, a significant event that had everyone talking. Naturally, Washio was clueless about this and asked Lenoa what all the fuss was about. Lenoa, ever sarcastic, couldn't believe Washio's ignorance, and condescendingly explained that it was to be expected. With a smirk, Lenoa finally relented and explained that monster girls were mutants of various kinds of monsters. They possessed intelligence far surpassing that of elves, had exceptional physical abilities, and were known for their stunning beauty, resembling young human girls. Despite being born as monsters, it remained a mystery why they took on human forms or what motivated them to do so. They were rare, so not many people even knew they existed. Washio, impressed by Lenoa's knowledge, offered some praise, but Lenoa brushed it off, calling it just superficial information. However, he couldn't resist pointing out that as a biology teacher, Washio should at least know the basics. Washio chuckled, admitting his incompetence in this area, and tried to defuse the situation by joking that he only specialized in lower-ranking monsters. Noah, unimpressed, suggested they end the conversation and return to listening to the principal, who had just been handed the microphone. The principal, a man with imposing horns on his head, led the gathering with a fervent prayer and praised the talented government officials and high-ranking officers who had promised a prosperous future for all. These individuals were part of the elite, and their words carried weight. After a lengthy speech, he asked the new female student to join them. She had been waiting nearby, and as soon as she crossed the threshold, the entire room fell silent in awe. Noah was stunned, unable to believe that someone like her would be attending their school. Washio, on the other hand, could only stare in surprise at the back of this mysterious newcomer. The principal, honored by her presence, welcomed her to the school, which boasted the strongest and most talented teachers. With a graceful wave, she greeted everyone, introducing herself as Claudia, a member of the Kraken species. Whispers of admiration for her beauty filled the room as everyone leaned forward, eager to catch a glimpse of the new student. Washio, still trying to see who had entered, was shocked to realize that Claudia was the same student he had encountered the previous day. The principal, with great respect, offered Claudia a week to review the teachers and choose the one she felt most comfortable with. However, she declined the offer, stating that she already had someone in mind. With deliberate steps, Claudia moved forward, heightening the suspense in the room. Dozens of teachers watched anxiously, waiting to see whom she would select. They didn't have to wait long. Claudia stood before her chosen teacher and, with a soft smile, said, "Long time no see." The words sent shockwaves through the room. Claudia revealed her true nature, releasing her tentacles, a clear sign that she was indeed a monster. Though many were startled by her sudden transformation, no one fled. Claudia's eyes sparkled as she waited for a reaction from Washio, but he stood frozen, struggling to place her. The smile on Claudia's face slowly faded as she realized he didn't recognize her. Washio, despite his best efforts, couldn't recall ever seeing her before. But then, like a flash, a memory surfaced. Washio remembered the octopus girl he had once trained. Claudia's affectionate voice pulled him back to a time of chaos and destruction, to the day of countless explosions, and the image of an octopus in a broken glass tube that had haunted him for years. He had believed that he failed to save her. The only thing that had stayed with him was the feeling of the wet tentacle that had once wrapped around his arm in a moment of trust. But that was a long time ago. The tentacles had been replaced by a warm, human hand. Claudia thanked her savior for not abandoning her that day, for giving her a chance at life. Now, as she had promised on that distant island, she had returned as a monster girl, ready to fulfill her vow with full confidence. The morning after Claudia's unexpected appearance, Washio was still preoccupied with thoughts from the previous day and ended up sleeping through most of the night. As a result, he woke up late and scrambled to get to the academy. His bag slipped off his shoulder as he ran as fast as he could, trying to make up for lost time. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out to him, causing him to stop abruptly. Claudia, having crossed paths with him on her way to school, greeted him cheerfully. The boys around them looked on with envy as Claudia waved and hurried over to him. Although Washio was out of breath, he managed to return the greeting. Noticing how difficult it was for him to run, Claudia suggested a quicker way to get to school. Before Washio could fully understand her plan, a tentacle wrapped around his arm, and Claudia took off running toward the academy, pulling him along. The sensation of being lifted off the ground felt almost like flying, but the rush of wind against his face quickly reminded him of their speed as they maneuvered through the crowd. Thanks to Claudia's swift and unconventional method, they arrived at the academy right before the bell rang, making it to class on time. Washio had recently been assigned as Claudia's personal teacher, which led to a noticeable drop in the number of students in his classroom. He placed the papers on his desk and felt a wave of relief for not being late to the academy for the first time in a month. Claudia, pleased by his gratitude, happily promised to visit his house daily from now on. Although it was somewhat embarrassing, Washio knew he couldn't easily dissuade her. As her mentor, Washio felt a bit like he was paying his dues, given that Claudia was the very creature he had once saved. Claudia, who had once been a small octopus the size of a ball, had grown so much that Washio hardly recognized her. Despite his initial discomfort, he couldn't help but smile as Claudia laughed cheerfully and complimented him, calling him great as always. At the teachers' council, a question arose about Claudia and Washio's relationship. Some members questioned whether it was appropriate for a student to be mentored by someone they knew, suggesting that a more qualified teacher might be better suited. The principal, however, dismissed these concerns, stating that he had confidence in Washio and preferred to let the decision stand. With that, Claudia and Washio left the council room and headed back to class. Limnoa, unable to let go of his frustration, stopped them halfway and argued that Claudia should be assigned a teacher of equal or higher rank, rather than a ranky professor like Washio. Claudia, clearly upset, objected to Limnoa's comments, finding it rude to refer to Washio solely by his rank. Limnoa was taken aback by her defense, but Washio, feeling exhausted, simply sighed. During class, Claudia noticed Washio's distracted state and asked if he was all right. Washio, scratching his head, dismissed her concern, stating it was nothing major. He then resumed the lesson, pulling out a sheet from his clipboard and asking Claudia about her experiences since starting at the academy. Claudia, pleased by his interest, shared that she had been enjoying the classes, especially biology. Washio, gratified by her positive response, thanked her. However, when Washio handed Claudia a form to fill out regarding her future, she became visibly distressed. The form was intended to outline her career path, something that was supposed to be straightforward given her potential. As a monster girl, Claudia was expected to pursue a high-ranking position, ideally in the king's department. Claudia, feeling cornered by this expectation, had hoped to forge her own path. She was disheartened by the pressure to follow a predetermined route, especially since her classmates and teachers had emphasized that all monster girls should follow this trajectory. Claudia had hoped for more flexibility in her future, but was met with rigid expectations and a lack of regard for her personal desires. As Claudia recounted the pressure she faced to conform to expectations, Washio listened quietly, his expression one of concern. He had his own thoughts and advice, but found himself at a loss for words. He felt inadequate to offer guidance on such a personal matter, considering his own limited experience and the complexities Claudia was facing. Despite her hopeful gaze, Washio hesitated, unsure of how to help. In the end, he told her to stay relaxed and take things lightly, before heading towards the door. Claudia remained in the now empty classroom, her sadness evident as she watched him leave. Lunchtime arrived, and the cafeteria buzzed with students eager to refuel after a demanding morning. Washio, with only a few sandwiches on his tray, wandered the hall looking for a place to sit. His meal was modest, reflecting his current financial constraints. As he moved through the crowd, Claudia spotted him and, with a burst of energy, wrapped him in one of her tentacles, startling him. Observing his meager lunch, she expressed concern, questioning if he had enough to eat and reminding him of the importance of proper nourishment. Despite Claudia's eagerness to follow the advice of her mentor, she faced an unexpected challenge when Limnoa intervened. As she prepared to hand over the completed form to Washio, Limnoa abruptly snatched it from her hands. With a dismissive sneer, he read through the form and, showing no respect, crumpled it into a ball. His anger was palpable as he berated Claudia for her decision, declaring that she was too talented to settle for a mere teaching position. Instead, he insisted she should aim for a prestigious role, such as a royal officer, and not waste her potential. Claudia, taken aback and frightened by Limnoa's authoritative demeanor, felt cornered and disheartened. Washio, who had been nearby, saw the unfolding scene and decided to intervene. He approached with a strained smile, trying to handle the situation delicately. He remarked that as a teacher, it was unacceptable to disregard a student's personal aspirations. Limnoa's temper flared at Washio's remarks, his frustration growing. He could not comprehend why Washio would support Claudia's wishes instead of pushing for higher aspirations. He argued heatedly that allowing a monster girl to choose her own path was a disservice to her potential and the world at large. The cafeteria, filled with students, fell silent as they witnessed the confrontation. Claudia, struggling to maintain composure, tried to calm the situation, but Limnoa's rage seemed unstoppable. As Limnoa's fury reached a peak, he declared that a talented student like Claudia should be learning from an A-ranked professor, not a mere E-ranked teacher. Washio, despite the tension, agreed with the general sentiment that Claudia deserved the best education possible, but he also recognized the importance of respecting her personal choices. Seeing Limnoa's unwavering stance, Claudia decided to take matters into her own hands. Frustrated with his continued interference, she reached out with her tentacles, placing a cold, wet mark on his neck and face. The unexpected sensation startled Lenoa, making him recoil in fear. As he turned toward Claudia, she swiftly retracted her tentacles, her expression firm and resolute. With a furrowed brow, Claudia demanded that Lenoa leave Washio alone. She declared that Washio had supported her dreams from the beginning, granting her the freedom to pursue her own path. She had no intention of allowing anyone but him to be her mentor. Claudia recalled a phrase Washio had once shared with her during a difficult time. Know yourself. These words had stayed with her, serving as a guiding principle through the years. Claudia placed her finger on her face and smiled, whispering the phrase softly. The surrounding crowd fell silent, reflecting on the meaning of her words. Each person interpreted the phrase in their own way, and even Lenoa struggled to grasp its significance. The phrase was Washio's way of encouraging Claudia to recognize and confront her fears, turning them into strengths. Washio was taken aback by her gesture and the fact that she had carried his words with her for so long. In that intense moment, as Claudia stood firm and determined, memories from the past surged through Washio's mind. He recalled the time when the octopus he had once saved expressed her dreams of becoming human and even marrying him. Back then, she felt self-conscious about her appearance and feared rejection, doubting that anyone could love her as she was. Washio, however, reassured her, lifting her into the air and squeezing her cheeks affectionately, making her look adorably vulnerable. He told her, "Know yourself," a phrase he had often used to encourage others to look within and discover their own strengths. For years, Washio had shared this lesson with his students, teaching them that before envying others, they should search for their own unique qualities and talents. He wanted them to focus on improving what they already had rather than longing for what they lacked. His interpretation of the phrase, though open to various philosophical perspectives, was simple and sincere. He believed that by embracing and developing one's own abilities, one could achieve greatness. Seeing Claudia as an adult now, Washio marveled at how this seemingly simple advice had profoundly impacted her. She had carried his words with her through her journey, from a small octopus to a remarkable monster girl. It filled him with happiness to see her succeed and fulfill her dreams. Claudia, placing a tentacle gently on Washio's shoulder, publicly acknowledged his role in helping her accept and embrace her abilities. She declared that he was the one responsible for her growth and, by extension, her studies. Lenoa's rage intensified as he listened to Claudia's heartfelt words, his anger bubbling over into a nearly uncontrollable fury. Surrounded by a sea of students, who watched the confrontation unfold with growing discomfort, he questioned what might become of Claudia under the tutelage of an old and seemingly ineffectual teacher like Washio. His expectation of rallying support crumbled as the students voiced their belief in Washio's value, despite his age and quirks. The children's comments stung Lenoa deeply, painting him as an unreasonable figure, and his frustration boiled over as they pointed out his tendency to insist on his own infallibility. Feeling humiliated and defeated, Lenoa clenched his fists, his face flushed with anger. He struggled to maintain his composure as he listened to the students defend Washio. His reaction, a rare display of raw emotion, left the students and Washio alike in shock. Lenoa gritted his teeth and abruptly fled the scene, vowing to remember the encounter and take his revenge. With Lenoa's departure, the tension in the cafeteria eased, and Washio, momentarily disoriented by the unexpected turn of events, found himself at a loss for words. Claudia, ever perceptive, gently brought him back to the present by suggesting they return to the cafeteria and buy lunch. She wrapped a tentacle around his arm, guiding him through the bustling space. As they approached the display case, Claudia, now a confident and capable monster girl, seemed eager to embrace her new role as a student and, eventually, a teacher. Washio felt a profound sense of fulfillment, recognizing that despite the challenges, his decision to become a teacher was worth every effort. He was glad to see Claudia thriving and achieving her dreams, even if it meant being reminded of his teachings from 2 decades ago. Lost in contemplation, Washio suddenly realized he had forgotten to bring any money for lunch. Embarrassed by his lapse, he hesitated before asking Claudia for a favor. He promised to repay her by the following week, grateful for her understanding and support. Claudia was on duty as a demonstration creature at Washio's request, showing off her skills to the students. Washio was explaining to the class that when surrounded by monster girls, you should never let your guard down. These girls weren't just about magic and poison, they had some serious strength too. To drive the point home, Claudia casually squeezed a tentacle around a stone and crushed it into bits, sending debris flying across the classroom. As the biology class, held under the dragon's crest, wrapped up, students filed out, cheering as they went. Many of the students were too scared to get close to Claudia, worried she might be dangerous, but she was way friendlier than they'd expected. Still, some kept their distance. After all, she was a monster. Claudia, hanging out by the blackboard with Washio, noticed that more and more students were showing up at the office lately. Washio told her it was all thanks to her. Whenever he asked for help with cleaning, she was more than happy to oblige, seeing it as a chance to spend time with him. Claudia was always up for any task, and Washio couldn't help but laugh at how eager she was. As Claudia approached, Washio was busy wiping the already clean board. She pointed out a spot at the top that he couldn't reach. Normally, you'd have to lower the board, but Claudia wasn't one for taking the long route. She simply grabbed another duster, slipped it over her tentacle, and reached up to wipe away the marks. Even though Washio knew about her octopus tentacles, watching her use them to clean up there still caught him off guard. He found himself muttering something about how convenient it was. Realizing he might have sounded silly, Washio quickly apologized, but Claudia wasn't offended at all. If anything, she was flattered. She grabbed another duster and kept cleaning, whispering to Washio about just how useful her tentacles were. Sliding them closer to him, she started listing their perks. They could stretch and shrink, be straight or wriggle around. Then, wrapping her arms around Washio's neck, she casually mentioned that they were perfect for crushing rocks, thanks to their strength. Washio tensed up, pretty freaked out by that last part. But then Claudia broke into a smile and added that they were just as great for giving massages. Washio soon found out she wasn't kidding. Her tentacles started crawling up his back, and it felt like he was getting a professional massage. He even thought this could be a hit service that could make Claudia a fortune. The massage was so good, in fact, that his legs gave out, and he ended up plopping down on the floor. Claudia placed the duster back in its holder, and then took a seat across from Washio, casually suggesting that he experience an even better massage. Her tentacles began to move around him in smooth, almost hypnotic motions, gently stroking him. Each tentacle had a different feel. Some were warm, while others were cool, even through his clothes. One tentacle wrapped around his legs and another around his arm, giving him a surprisingly soothing sensation. It didn't last long, though. After just a few minutes, Claudia suddenly stopped, raising her hands with a playful grin as she admitted she was just kidding. Washio felt a cold sweat drip down his forehead. Being pestered by a girl who didn't quite follow human norms was unnerving, to say the least. Claudia leaned in close, her face just inches from his, and asked if he enjoyed the massage. When he didn't answer, she started pestering him more, asking what he was thinking about so intently that he stopped paying attention to her. After everything that had happened, Washio had no desire to be alone with her anymore. Desperate for an escape, he pointed to the door and urged her to hurry up since the next class was about to start. Claudia, clearly not thrilled by his response, pouted and turned away. She didn't want to leave, she wanted to spend more time with him. But with no other option, she reluctantly said goodbye and ran to the exit, already looking forward to seeing him at lunch. Once she was gone, Washio sighed in exhaustion. Dealing with a girl as unpredictable as Claudia was no easy task. All the excitement had drained him, and he found himself crawling under the table, the only place where he could finally catch a break. As Claudia walked slowly down the hall, she crossed not just her arms but her tentacles too, feeling a bit frustrated. Gaining Washio's admiration was proving to be more difficult than she'd expected, but she wasn't ready to give up. With a new plan forming in her mind, she hurried off to her next class. Meanwhile, an elegant carriage stopped near the gates of the academy. A girl in a beautiful white dress stepped out, holding her hair up as she gazed into the building's windows. She wondered if her teacher, Washio, still remembered her. Back in his room, Washio lay in bed, reflecting on the crazy day he'd had at school. The experience with Claudia's tentacles was unlike anything he'd ever gone through before. He couldn't shake the memory of how warm and slimy they felt, and as he drifted off to sleep, nightmares of those tentacles wrapping around him filled his mind. Washio finally had a day off without any overtime, a rare, precious miracle that he didn't want anything to ruin. He had so many plans for the day, so he stretched his arms and walked through the bustling square, completely unaware that someone was following him. A ringing female voice called out his name, followed by the clatter of heels. While he was still stretching, a girl suddenly ran up behind him and hugged him affectionately, catching him completely off guard. He had no idea what was happening, and when he turned to see who it was, he panicked and jumped back, falling to the ground with a scream. The pretty girl, wearing a hat, greeted him with a cute, "Long time no see," though many people around them were giving her strange looks. Washio, still sitting on the ground, glanced at the onlookers and then at the girl, clearly confused. He had no idea who she was, and it showed. The girl smiled sweetly, covering her mouth with her hand in an elegant gesture, realizing that her appearance and personality had changed a lot since they last met. To jog his memory, she began to lift the hem of her dress slightly, exposing her thighs just a bit. Washio stared at her in bewilderment, wondering why on earth she would do something so reckless in public. Then, 3 pairs of thin spider legs, previously hidden, emerged from beneath her clothes as she curtsied. She revealed that she was the monster girl he had once rescued. The sight of this creature caused quite a stir among the passers-by, who quickly gathered around to witness the spectacle. Washio, however, was too shocked to say anything, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Left with no other choice, he reluctantly invited her to dinner, since she clearly wanted to talk. As they entered the restaurant, the Spider-Woman marveled at its design, her first time in such a small and quaint establishment. The waiter, however, wasn't as impressed, asking her to take a seat at a table. She glanced up at the ceiling, noticing the dilapidated chandelier with genuine curiosity. She eventually sat down beside a dirty barrel that served as a chair, even admiring it. The waiter, growing increasingly irritated, couldn't believe how openly his establishment was being insulted. He approached Washio, pointing out that while his companion was beautiful, she clearly lacked manners. He even turned pale with frustration before apologizing for her behavior. Washio, feeling the tension, admitted it was his first time bringing someone to this restaurant and asked the waiter for a bit of leniency. After all, sitting at an empty table felt awkward, so he requested a slightly better dish than what he usually ordered. While he was sorting things out, the Spider-Woman placed her hat in Washio's lap, her curiosity about the building still piqued as she peered around every corner. Soon their food arrived. The girl, unfazed by the attention of others, tucked her hair behind her ear and took a bite of some fried meat skewers. She chewed slowly, savoring the flavor, but it was clear she wasn't impressed. She finally remarked that it was the first time she had been served meat so dry and with such a bad smell. Washio felt a pang of guilt for his companion, especially as the other diners seemed to be captivated by her beauty. He quickly asked her to stop saying anything negative before the owner decided to kick them out. The monster girl, though, didn't understand why she was being reproached. She was sure she hadn't said anything bad and insisted that she was actually delighted with the restaurant, which was unique to the city. To top it off, she introduced herself, smiling sweetly and asking to be called Aria from now on. The name seemed to enchant those around her. Some admired it, others whispered how perfectly it suited her, and everyone appreciated her elegance. No matter who was in the establishment, everyone seemed to take a liking to Aria. As Washio sipped his drink, he couldn't believe how much Aria had changed. Once, she was just a shy spider girl, modestly weaving cobwebs in the corner of the classroom. Now, she had transformed into a beautiful woman who could easily pass as human. Lowering her gaze, Aria reminisced about those old days, back when she couldn't accept herself. It was only because of Washio and his kind words back then that she had been able to achieve so much more. Washio, however, didn't quite catch what she was getting at and simply raised his mug. Suddenly, Aria's heart fluttered as she spoke of eagerly awaiting her first lesson with her teacher, wondering what magic he would teach her. But since the conversation had turned in that direction, Washio clarified that he was now just a simple biology teacher. The shock of his words nearly made Aria drop her meat skewer. She didn't understand why he had decided to change his job and asked in a raised voice why he had done it. Washio, though, seemed unconcerned. On the surface, he appeared content, smiling at the people around them, but in reality, he was just avoiding the topic. Thankfully, Aria picked up on this and didn't press further, though she sighed tiredly as she continued eating. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, so Washio decided to change the subject. He asked if Aria remembered Claudia, the octopus who had become a real monster girl and was now his apprentice. Though Washio was glad that Claudia had grown and become his equal, There was still a strange feeling lingering in his heart, especially since he had to spend every lunchtime with someone so obsessively attached to him. Claudia had once dismissed her behavior as just an octopus habit, but compared to the past, she had clearly changed. With every mention of Claudia, Aria's good mood seemed to drift further away. She struggled to keep her jealousy in check, unable to bear hearing any more about the octopus girl. Finally, unable to take it anymore, she lifted her wooden mug and dramatically ordered the 5 most expensive dishes on the menu. Washio could practically feel his wallet crumbling under the weight of the bill that was coming. The food was devoured quickly, the drinks downed, and soon the table was left with nothing but dirty dishes stained with leftover sauce. As they stepped outside, Arya thanked Washio for his hospitality and emphasized that he didn't need to pay for her. However, Washio insisted that it was no problem, though he knew he'd be eating bread alone for the next week. As they approached the main street, Washio kindly offered to walk Arya back to the dormitory since they had spent quite a long time in the restaurant. However, Arya graciously declined his offer, thanking him for his concern. She explained that she couldn't take advantage of his kindness today because a carriage was already waiting for her. Before getting into the carriage, she suddenly threw herself into his arms, catching him off guard for the second time that day. Arya was genuinely overjoyed to see him after so many years, and as she snuggled closer to his chest, she whispered how thankful she was for the wonderful day they had shared. Washio, despite the awkwardness and inconvenience Arya had caused, realized he was glad to see her too. Time flew by, and after helping her into the carriage, Washio headed home on his own. Meanwhile, inside the carriage, Arya initially sat quietly, reflecting on the busy day. Her joy bubbled up, causing her human legs and spider limbs to tap the floor with excitement. Her long-held dream had finally come true. Thanks to her transformation, she was able to hug him at last. But as soon as she recalled how animatedly Washio had spoken about Claudia, her mood soured, and the smile slipped from her beautiful face. Arya felt a pang of anger as she remembered Washio's insatiable enthusiasm for the octopus girl. The mere thought of Claudia made her snort in frustration, and she turned her face toward the wall of the carriage. Realizing that dwelling on Claudia was only making her feel worse, she decided to distract herself by looking out the window. But as soon as she lowered her gaze, she noticed a white box wrapped in holiday ribbons sitting beside her. It was the gift she had brought for Washio, but in the whirlwind of the day, she had forgotten to give it to him. Now she wondered if it was too late to deliver it. Meanwhile, back at the academy, Claudia was in class when she asked about Washio's whereabouts. Noah casually mentioned that Washio had already left for the day and had been seen leaving with a beautiful black-haired girl. The news struck Claudia like a lightning bolt, and her face went completely pale as the realization set in. Arya had been deep in thought about what to do with the gift when she suddenly halted her carriage and bolted out like her life depended on it. Her heels clacked loudly across the wide square as she scanned every nook and cranny under the cover of night, desperately trying to find Washio. She peeked around every corner, into every shadowy alley, but it soon hit her like a ton of bricks. Washio had probably already gone home. Frustrated, she stomped her foot under a streetlight, raising the white box she was clutching. The only chance to give it to him would now have to wait until they were back at the academy. As she stood there, mentally kicking herself, the peace of the night was suddenly shattered by a chorus of panicked voices. People were running around her like it was the apocalypse, shouting about a fire at a church just a few alleys away. Without missing a beat, Arya took off toward the chaos, her heart racing with a mix of fear and curiosity. When she arrived, the scene was straight out of a disaster movie. The church was a blazing inferno, every floor engulfed in flames with smoke thick enough to blot out the stars. Arya froze, her jaw practically hitting the ground as she stared in disbelief. No one had a clue what started the fire, but the devastation was plain as day. People were scrambling everywhere, tossing buckets of water at the flames, but it was like trying to put out a bonfire with a squirt gun. Nearby, a group of kids, clearly caught in the fire's path, were being tended to with wet rags while they waited for the doctor. The men were hauling water like their lives depended on it, while the women shielded the crying kids, trying to keep them from seeing their home go up in smoke. The kids, terrified, were covering their ears to block out the horrifying sounds of crackling wood and the screams of their friends, probably wondering where they'd go once this nightmare ended. An older nun was frantically trying to get back into the church, but a guy was holding her back, keeping her from doing something seriously reckless. Tears were streaming down her face as she begged to be let go, convinced some kids might still be trapped inside. The door frame was already a blazing mess, making it way too dangerous to enter. Hearing the nun's desperate cries, Arya rushed over and asked if the kids were really inside. Choking on her words, the nun admitted it was possible, confessing that the fire might have started because the kids accidentally knocked over a candle while playing. She also blamed herself, admitting she'd been slacking off on her duties, thinking she could just fetch bread the next day instead of keeping an eye on things. Racked with guilt, she was now pleading for someone to save them. Arya, unable to leave the poor woman hanging, grabbed her hand, flashed a reassuring smile, and promised to handle it. Despite the crowd's warnings about the danger, Arya was determined and brushed off their concerns. She charged through the burning doors, covering her nose to avoid the choking smoke, and began scanning the corridor. The entire place was bathed in an eerie red glow, flames devouring everything in sight, with sparks flying and igniting new fires. Even though Arya had never quite mastered the water element, the urgency of the situation pushed her to give it a try on the fly. Time was running out. If she didn't find the child fast, the kid would be at serious risk of suffocation. Arya tore through each room, searching through the blaze, lifting boards, and desperately seeking any sign of life. She shouted at the top of her lungs, calling for any survivors, but the only answer was the relentless roar of the flames. Just when she thought she might be too late, she heard a faint cough, barely audible over the noise. Thanks to her sharp senses, Arya tracked down the source. She found a boy trapped under a fallen bookcase and, with a swift motion, snapped the bookcase in two and pulled him out. She laid him on his back, relieved that, even though he was unconscious, he was at least safe for now. But the fire had been raging for a while, and the building was in bad shape. Arya noticed that one of the support beams above them was cracked and about to collapse. She figured a lightning strike could destroy it, but there was a big problem. Using any kind of force might hurt the kid. The distance was too close, and any misstep could burn the boy badly. Just as Arya was wrestling with this dangerous dilemma, a noise from behind caught her attention. To her relief, a group of rescuers had arrived. They quickly took over, and just in time too, the support beam finally gave way. If they hadn't shown up, Arya might have had to pull off some heroic last-ditch effort to shield the kid from the falling debris. Suddenly, a dark, demonic arm shot out from above, blocking the collapsing ceiling. Arya looked up, and there it was, a creature with a bizarre animal skull for a head. It was Washio's summoned entity, a product of one of those spells he'd picked up during his travels in another world. The creature, obeying Washio's command without hesitation, held up the ceiling like it was no big deal. Meanwhile, Washio himself was busy summoning water, using it to fight the fire. Arya shielded her eyes from the falling debris and intense heat. When she finally dared to look again, she was greeted by an incredible sight. A swarm of beautifully crafted water fish swimming gracefully around her, dousing the flames. Her eyes widened in awe as she recognized the familiar magic. It had been 20 years since she last saw it, but Washio's spellwork was as powerful and stunning as ever. Once again, he had swooped in to save the day. To anyone watching, it would seem like Washio had returned to his glory days as the kingdom's top-tier magician, the legendary Golden Eagle. But Washio was never one to brag. Anytime someone mentioned his title, he'd just wave it off, acting like he was nothing more than a simple biology teacher. He often joked about getting old, calling himself an old man with a sore shoulder. Using magic had taken its toll on his health, so he was careful about when and how much he used it. A breathtaking spectacle unfolded as countless magical fish swam around the church, which had been completely filled with water. The once burning boards, books, and furnishings now floated like an elaborate aquarium display. People gathered outside the church, watching in amazement at this miraculous event. The entire church was submerged in water, top to bottom. One onlooker turned to his friend and asked if he was responsible for this miracle that had stopped the fire from spreading to nearby buildings. His friend, a humble baker, shook his head and explained that he didn't possess the magical skill for such a feat. The water had extinguished the fire entirely, revealing the beautiful magic at work. Water creatures glided effortlessly through the liquid, moving with grace. Amidst the crowd, a little girl who had been crying suddenly ran toward the water, her flower wreath fluttering in the breeze. Despite her mother's attempts to calm her, the child was captivated by the enchanting scene. As she approached the water, she gazed in wonder at the vibrant, shimmering fish. Entranced by their beauty, she instinctively reached out, trying to touch one of the magical creatures, though her hand passed through. Arya then emerged from the church, carrying a soot-covered child who lay motionless on her back. The crowd's amazement quickly turned to concern when they realized she had ventured into the blazing inferno despite the warnings. Many rushed over to ask if she was hurt, but the church minister spotted the child on her back and immediately called for a doctor. Arya reassured the minister that she had used healing magic on the child as soon as she found him, but agreed a doctor should provide additional care. The child's mother threw herself at Arya's feet, thanking her fervently and praying for her. The crowd erupted in cheers, their admiration for Arya growing. A tall man in the front, visibly relieved, noted that only a true monster girl could have performed such an extraordinary feat, flooding an entire church with water magic. His praise was echoed by others, who marveled at her abilities and speculated whether she was the legendary monster girl, or a new species with enchanting looks and formidable powers. As the crowd's questions and praise intensified, Arya tried to calm them, explaining that the magic wasn't entirely her own. She looked around, hoping to spot Washio, but he remained in the background, walking away with a briefcase on his shoulder, avoiding the attention. Arya wanted to acknowledge Washio's role in the miraculous rescue, but he seemed intent on staying unnoticed. With a wave of his hand, Washio urged Arya to accept the praise and not make a fuss. Reluctantly, she complied, staying amidst the crowd and enduring their enthusiasm. As Arya held her ground, the water magic began to fade, revealing the church beneath, now covered in soot and showing signs of the devastating fire. As the water dome finally disappeared, leaving behind no trace of its magical presence, the girl with the flower wreath looked visibly upset. The disappearance of the dome left her with a sense of loss, and she quickly turned toward the crowd, her eyes searching for the source of the magic. She spotted Arya beginning to walk away from the scene and rushed over to her, excitedly asking about the fish she had seen. Arya, with a warm smile, explained that it was all magic. She admitted that she didn't have Washio's incredible power, but she had managed to conjure a few magical fish just for the child. The girl's face lit up with pure joy, still absorbed in the wonder of it all. Arya then noticed the wreath on the child's head and inquired about it. The child recounted how, during the fire, an old stranger had approached her, placing flowers on her head and comforting her with words that everything would be all right. Even though she had been saddened by the church burning, the stranger's kind gesture had lifted her spirits. As the child continued to play with the magical fish, her smile grew wider, and she exclaimed how amazing magic was for making everyone smile. She now loved magic even more. Arya was touched by the child's innocent joy, which brought back memories from her own past. Arya recalled a time long ago, before she could transform, when Washio had given her a flower wreath for her spider body. She had been embarrassed and unsure how to react, awkwardly thanking him. She remembered feeling puzzled by his gift and wondering why he taught them magic when no one had asked him to. Washio's simple explanation had been that the secret to living well is giving. He believed that whether it was flowers, knowledge, or smiles, giving to others could improve one's mood and make life better. The act of giving, he said, helped both the giver and the receiver find happiness. As Arya gently stroked the little girl's face, Washio's affectionate voice echoed in her mind. He spoke about how the small, once timid spider had become a beacon of hope for those around her. It was this transformation and new sense of purpose that had inspired him to dedicate his life to teaching and helping others. For Arya, seeing the joy she could bring to others became a new meaning in life, just as it had for Washio. Arya had always aspired to make a difference, to help those in need. Despite the challenges she faced, including Claudia's interference, she was determined to live up to that promise. She envisioned herself as the next person to give Washio a flower wreath, a symbol of gratitude and hope. No matter where Washio went, Arya vowed to follow him, embodying the spirit of giving that had shaped her own journey. Standing outside the smoldering church, Arya continued to entertain the child, showing her new magic and ensuring her day ended on a high note. As the crowd dispersed and people began to head home, Arya finally made her way back, ready to embrace the new day at the academy. Exhausted from her efforts but content, she fell into a deep sleep, her body quickly succumbing to the rest it needed. With the arrival of a new school day, the academy buzzed with the latest gossip. The students, still shaken by the recent church fire in the central district, discussed the incident with excitement and curiosity. Most were unnerved by how close the blaze had come but were relieved that the fire had been controlled. Initially, many believed Claudia, known for her impressive skills, was the hero. However, the true savior had been Arya, who had just started her day at the academy. On the second floor, Arya stood engaged in a discussion about how quickly rumors could spread in such a bustling city. Despite Arya's reluctance to listen to the gossip, insisted she should be aware of the rumors circulating. Resentfully, Arya admitted that Washio had been the true force behind the miraculous rescue, while she had only managed a few basic water spells herself. Claudia, visibly disappointed by her lack of involvement, and missing the chance to see Washio's full magical prowess, eagerly awaited the day she could witness it firsthand. As the conversation continued, Washio approached them, curious about their discussion. Upon noticing him, both women paused. Arya, ever graceful, performed a deep curtsy and expressed her gratitude. She handed Washio a neatly wrapped gift, a white box tied with a beautiful ribbon. This small token was her way of thanking him for his guidance and support, which had helped her transform into the monster girl she was today. Washio, though unsure if he should accept the gift, was reassured by Arya's insistence and her reminder of his own philosophy that living is giving. With curiosity and anticipation, Washio opened the box right away, under Claudia's watchful and increasingly envious gaze. Inside was a tie adorned with an intricate spiderweb design. Washio's eyes brightened at the sight, but his excitement waned as Arya eagerly helped him put it on, her happiness evident as she admired how well it suited him. Claudia, feeling left out and unable to contain her jealousy, started to release her tentacles, intent on pulling Arya away from Washio. She was clearly annoyed by Arya's overly affectionate gesture. As the two argued over which tie pattern, spiderwebs or tentacles, would suit Washio better, many students passing on the first floor were oblivious to the commotion above. Washio, caught in the middle of the escalating argument, could only look on in confusion and ask them to stop. Washio carefully reviewed the form that Arya had just handed him, noting that her primary goal was to join the magical guard. Given Arya's exceptional magical abilities, Washio wasn't surprised. Among all his students, Arya stood out with her raw talent and potential, making her a strong candidate for the position. Regardless of the path she ultimately chose, Washio reassured her that he would support her every step of the way. Offering a warm smile, he promised to work tirelessly alongside her to help her achieve her dreams. Arya, overcome with enthusiasm, quickly enveloped him in a hug. Though slightly taken aback, Washio had grown accustomed to these spontaneous displays of affection from both Arya and Claudia. Despite the occasional surprise, he cherished these moments, finding deep satisfaction in seeing his students passionately pursue their aspirations. Later, in the teacher's lounge, Washio found himself in the middle of a lively debate between two of his colleagues. They were passionately arguing over which faction would claim victory this season. The consensus was that the Limnoa faction was the likely winner, having maintained an undefeated streak for the past 5 years. The professor's enthusiasm and competitive spirit were palpable, but Washio, not being directly involved in the contest, remained detached from the excitement. He observed their determination with a sense of quiet amusement, acknowledging their optimism while staying focused on his own responsibilities. Meanwhile, Claudia and Arya sat by the Academy's beautiful fountain, their conversation filled with nostalgia and laughter. Claudia playfully reminisced about the times she had teased Arya, recalling moments when Arya would respond by biting or using her poison to settle disputes. Arya blushed at the memory but bore no ill will, even as Claudia continued to tease her about her aversion to caterpillars, a curious trait for a spider girl. Trying to steer the conversation to a more serious topic, Arya asked Claudia about her future goals and what had brought her to the academy. Claudia shared her aspiration of becoming a teacher like Washio, envisioning a future where monsters and humans could learn together in harmony. This revelation made Arya's face brighten as she realized they shared a common dream. The bond between them deepened, and their conversation flowed smoothly, rooted in their shared vision. Their peaceful moment was abruptly interrupted by a trio of students approaching with unwelcome enthusiasm. The group, consisting of a boy and 2 girls, was impeccably dressed, their polished appearances reflecting their pride. The boy, Frederick, rudely addressed them as monster girls, and invited them to join his faction. Although unfamiliar with the term faction and the Academy's procedures, The girls listened as Frederick introduced himself as a second-year student from Lemnoa's faction. The taller girl was a third-year student from Alba, while the other was from Julius, also a third year. Claudia's confusion was apparent as she asked Frederick to explain what a faction was. He explained that a faction was a group of students who voluntarily gathered for mutual benefit, focusing on various methods of activating magic. Students within the same faction collaborated to enhance their theoretical knowledge and practical skills. After the explanation, Arya turned to Claudia, seeking her input on their next steps. Frederick, undeterred and overconfident, continued his aggressive pitch to Claudia and Arya. He extolled the virtues of joining Lemnoa's faction, emphasizing how chanting could significantly enhance their magical power. His enthusiasm was evident as he suggested that joining his faction would help them master chanting and become part of the most formidable student group. His persistence took a bold turn when he dropped to one knee and took their hands, confidently proposing that they join him in toppling the strongest faction to become the most powerful students themselves. Claudia, shocked by the audacity of his offer, immediately withdrew her tentacle from Frederick's grasp, her disdain clear. She firmly declined his proposal, making it obvious she had no interest in joining them. Arya, while more reserved, also politely declined, hinting that Frederick had much to learn before he could effectively lead a faction. A girl from the Alba faction attempted to sway Arya, but she too was met with rejection. Both Arya and Claudia expressed a preference for other forms of training, with Claudia particularly favoring physical training over the magical meetings Frederick was promoting. Refusing to take no for an answer, Frederick proposed a duel to settle the matter. He was adamant that the outcome, where the first to successfully use magic to attack would win, would determine whether they would join his faction. Ignoring Claudia's protests and her lack of consent, he immediately began to cast a spell. Frederick's magic quickly manifested as a large wave of water, rapidly expanding to a size capable of engulfing the second floor of the academy. His lack of restraint and eagerness to demonstrate his power were evident as the massive wave surged toward Claudia and Arya. Arya, sensing the impending danger, stood her ground, trusting in Claudia's abilities. Claudia, her anger simmering just below the surface, responded with her own powerful magic. With a swift motion of her tentacle, she created a counter-stream that sliced through Frederick's wave, splitting it into two manageable parts. Her gaze was fierce, and her demeanor was unimpressed. Clearly, she was infuriated by Frederick's recklessness and his misguided attempt to challenge them. Frederick, however, remained unfazed by the dramatic display. His smile didn't falter as he observed the magical exchange. His decision to challenge Claudia, a formidable opponent, was a grave mistake. Claudia's frustration was now palpable, and she barely restrained herself from confronting him physically. The fact that Frederick had given her the chance to retaliate was an error he would soon regret. In response to Claudia's powerful counterattack, Frederick prepared what he considered his decisive move. Drawing on one of his strongest techniques, he aimed to demonstrate his superiority and prove the strength of his faction. With a self-satisfied smirk, Frederick summoned a massive, furry beast that materialized behind him. The creature, a colossal wolf exuding a dark, menacing aura, growled menacingly, its breath visible in the cool air. Its sheer size and sinister presence were enough to intimidate anyone in its path. Frederick had summoned it to add a formidable challenge to the duel, confident that its magical power would put Claudia and Arya to the test. When a spell is cast, a magic symbol known as the image of magic power naturally appears from the shadows. This phenomenon, occurring with higher-ranked magic, is a true reflection of the caster's essence and power. The image of magic power symbolizes the materialization of the caster's spirit, taking various forms such as beasts, spirits, or other entities. The form and size of this manifestation are directly proportional to the caster's magical strength. The more potent the magic, the larger and more formidable the image. Frederick's summon, a towering wolf shrouded in black smoke, stood as a testament to his considerable magical prowess. Reveling in his perceived superiority, he detailed his power with narcissistic pride. The wolf, menacing and standing on its hind legs, wasn't just a display of Frederick's magical might. It was a symbol of his inflated ego. With a smirk, Frederick taunted Claudia and Arya, flaunting the size and ferocity of his magical form, oblivious to the gravity of the situation and focused solely on his own arrogance. In the academy, students understood that the form and size of magical manifestations indicated a mage's strength. Professor Lim Noah had taught them that these images serve as a measure of one's magical abilities. Frederick's wolf, towering slightly above him, reflected his significant power but also his overconfidence. Those who had observed Frederick's previous magical displays noted his growth, predicting that within 2 years, his magical form would become even more formidable. Arya, with her sharp intellect and keen observation skills, quickly assessed the situation and Frederick's true capabilities. Despite his boastful demeanor, she recognized that his display of magic was indeed impressive, suggesting a high rank, possibly C or higher. Frederick, however, was eager for validation, pushing Arya and Claudia to acknowledge his prowess. His smug confidence soon shifted to a more menacing stance as he invoked a powerful spell, summoning a massive, razor-sharp block of ice aimed directly at Claudia. Claudia's tentacles swiftly dismantled the ice block, the shards melting away before hitting the ground, a clear demonstration of her impressive defensive capabilities. Seizing the opportunity to further showcase his superiority, Frederick boasted about the strength of his magic and the prowess of his faction. He reveled in the attention and admiration from those around him, using the moment to emphasize Lim Noah faction's enhanced magical abilities. His claim that his principal could produce spells 3 times more potent than his own only heightened his self-satisfaction, as he eagerly anticipated being awarded the prestigious gold title. Despite Frederick's persistence and the crowd's awe at his display of power, Claudia and Arya remained unmoved. The contrast between Frederick's arrogance and Claudia and Arya's composed strength was striking, leaving many in the crowd with a newfound respect for the monster girls. Adhering to Washio's teachings, Claudia and Arya chose to remain restrained. Washio had instilled in them the principle of using their powers judiciously and for noble purposes, never for trivial pursuits or against weaker opponents. Claudia raised her hand, signaling her intent to address Frederick, though she hesitated, feeling the need to consult Washio before making any firm decisions. Arya, standing silently behind Claudia, nodded in agreement, supporting her decision to handle the situation with care and thoughtfulness. However, Frederick's bravado took a dangerous turn as his arrogance led him to insult Washio directly. What began as feigned ignorance quickly escalated into blatant disrespect. This was a trigger for Claudia and Arya, who had, until then, tried to remain civil despite Frederick's aggressive recruitment tactics. Frederick's accusations against Washio were a direct affront to everything Claudia and Arya held dear. He disparaged Washio's character, questioning his competence and casting aspersions on his achievements and teaching methods. Frederick's claims were based on hearsay and his own biased interpretations. He recounted an incident in the dining room where Claudia had expressed gratitude toward Washio, dismissing it as mere pretense rather than genuine sentiment. Frederick's narrative, fueled by misinformation from Lim Noah, painted Washio as a failed teacher who resorted to exploiting and threatening his students for personal gain. As Frederick's slander of Washio continued, the tension in the courtyard escalated. Claudia's frustration reached a boiling point, and without warning, a massive hole appeared in the head of the summoned wolf. The blast had breached one of the academy's towers, causing an explosion that sent debris flying and left everyone in stunned silence. The sudden, devastating display of power shocked Frederick and the onlookers, who had initially been captivated by his magical prowess. Now, they witnessed the raw strength and fury of the monster girls. Claudia's tentacles, now armed with sharp, menacing spikes, and the immense destruction she had wrought, instilled both fear and awe. Arya, though less visibly angry than Claudia, was equally resolute in defending Washio's honor. With a calm but firm demeanor, she addressed Frederick, correcting his falsehoods with a pointed curtsy that underscored her anger. Her gaze was fierce, her spider legs poised as a clear warning. Her message was unambiguous. Washio was a distinguished teacher, not the ineffectual figure Frederick had described. Frederick, now thoroughly disillusioned and terrified, realized the gravity of his mistake. His earlier bravado vanished, replaced by the crushing fear of the consequences of his actions. The confrontation with the monster girls had made it painfully clear that he had grossly underestimated their strength and resolve. The spiked tentacles of the octopus were much rougher and stronger than the usual ones. Despite being a very pretty and cute girl, the fierceness within her was striking. Similarly, the spider girl's sharp legs looked unattractive and frightening, making people view them as real monsters. The girls wanted Frederick to apologize for mocking their teacher. Frederick, who seemed to have lost all sense of composure, was visibly shaken by their presence. Arya, not wanting to stay in the tense situation, urged him to hurry up with the apology. The sight of them made Frederick tremble even more, and when they demanded he apologize quickly, he almost lost his balance. The students were shocked when the library tower exploded, turning a casual conversation into a dangerous spectacle. At that moment, an excited Washio, who had heard rumors about a battle between disciples, arrived. He rushed to the fountain and saw the collapsed tower. Washio, who prioritized people's safety over material things, immediately asked the bystanders if there were any casualties. Linoa, who had arrived with him, was puzzled by the situation. Hearing from his colleague that the tower had collapsed, he couldn't believe it, as it seemed impossible. As soon as Washio looked up, he saw that the top of the tower was indeed gone. This was a heavy blow for him, as it was clear that not many students could cause such destruction. From this, he quickly guessed that one of the monster girls was responsible. Washio asked the onlookers to identify the culprits, so they could face appropriate punishment. However, the students, finding it difficult to draw conclusions in the current chaos, chose to remain silent. Claudia also disagreed with the constant blame on the monsters. She pointed out that Frederick had been the first to attack them with magic. She even pointed her finger at him to clarify that he wasn't someone else with the same name. But before she could make her point, Frederick grabbed her hand and pulled it to her side. Claudia's face went pale, and she felt a surge of panic. Frederick, with his usual pretty demeanor, knelt down and confessed his feelings for her in front of everyone, leaving her in shock. Arya, taken aback by the surprising turn of events, covered her mouth but decided to stick around and watch the show. Washio and Limnoa exchanged puzzled looks, struggling to understand why things had escalated so quickly and why Frederick and Claudia were at the center of it all. Frederick, grinning from ear to ear, couldn't stop showering Claudia with praise. He admired her magical prowess and the sheer power she possessed. To him, she seemed like the perfect being. As he examined her hand, he realized that the magic was activated by lifting the finger with the ring on it. While anyone could use magic, their strength would diminish, but with this ring, explosive power could be tapped with greater efficiency. Frederick was thrilled by this revelation, feeling an excitement he had never experienced before. Overwhelmed by his feelings, he boldly declared his love and asked Claudia out on a date. Claudia, meanwhile, looked utterly flabbergasted. Her face twisted into a grimace as if she had just bitten into a lemon, shocked by how Frederick could blurt out such awkward and embarrassing declarations with such ease. Washio couldn't bear to watch the awkward scene any longer, so he stepped in, apologizing for interrupting what seemed like a love quarrel. He reminded everyone that using magic outside of class was against school rules, so they would need to write an explanatory note. Just then, Claudia yanked her hand away and insisted that this was not a love quarrel, her lips forming a pout. Under the watchful eyes of the teachers, they all went off to write their notes. Claudia, frustrated, kept glancing around while Frederick followed her with an unnerving smile. There was nothing she could do about it since they all had to go in the same direction. Meanwhile, Linoa saw this as a golden opportunity to taunt his rival. With one of the library towers destroyed, he scolded Washio for his teaching methods, questioning what he taught his students that led them to so recklessly damage the academy's property. Washio, however, had full confidence in Claudia and Arya, believing they were provoked and that their behavior wasn't typical. Despite the inconvenience, Washio apologized to Linoa. Claudia then tugged on Washio's sleeve and pointed out the real culprit. Washio thought that was enough, so he was about to leave with the others when Linoa's hand stopped him. The professor of magic offered to help Washio with the challenging task of educating the students. He slyly promised that he would gladly take over the job of managing the monster girls, suggesting it might even be better for them. Washio chose to ignore the offer and was promptly pulled away by Claudia, who used her tentacle to drag him along while pushing Frederick aside. Linoa watched with a smirk, eagerly anticipating Washio's discomfort and disappointment. Washio, though, only offered an awkward smile, knowing well that stubbornness was one of his defining traits. The trio of troublemakers was taken to the teacher's lounge, where several teachers awaited. Frederick, being one of the first to complete his explanatory note, managed to infuriate Claudia not only with his speed but also with his flawless handwriting. Reading Frederick's note, Washio saw that Frederick had admitted to being the first to attack, followed by Claudia. Though Frederick's honesty and genuine remorse were clear, Claudia's frustration grew as she awaited her punishment. It was a letdown for Washio, especially since he was a member of the Limnoa faction, but considering no one was injured, he asked that the Academy's rules not be violated again. Unexpectedly, Frederick revealed that Professor Limnoa usually covered for him, ensuring he wouldn't get caught. This confession shocked everyone and exposed Limnoa's true nature. Claudia and Arya quickly came to the conclusion that Frederick was nothing more than a waste of their time. Having received his reprimand, Frederick was eager to leave. He almost let slip a nasty remark to Washio, but was brought back to reality by Claudia's icy stare. He managed to excuse himself and headed off to class. Frederick, however, decided to make the most of the situation. He approached Claudia with a grandiose promise, claiming that one day he would free her from Professor Washio's influence and save her like a hero. He said he would then officially ask her out. In the meantime, he asked her to wait, explaining it would take some time. Claudia was not impressed by his speech and rejected both his touch and his offer, telling him she never wanted to see him again. Frederick also couldn't ignore Arya, and though he blushed slightly, he attempted a similar, though pointless, speech. He apologized for his previous behavior and admitted he didn't understand insects, which was why he couldn't love her. The topic irritated Claudia even more, and she hoped Frederick would soon wrap up his nonsense and leave. Unfortunately, he only continued to rant, insisting that despite her spider nature, he would patiently wait for her and eventually welcome her into his faction in a friendly manner. He had no idea how much his words were grating on her, as she struggled to hold back her frustration. When Frederick finally finished his speech, Claudia continued to reject his offers. Fortunately, he had to leave for class, so he backed off, reluctantly accepting her response. After saying goodbye to the professor, he departed, while Arya and Claudia pointedly ignored him and didn't bother with a farewell. Washio observed the scene with a smile and remarked that he was envious of their youthful spirit. His comments seemed to shock Claudia and Arya, leaving Claudia looking pale and ghostly. She asked Washio to stop mocking her, and Arya, uncomfortable with the situation, also wanted to know what was wrong with Claudia. It didn't take long for Washio to realize he had been wrong. He quickly bowed his head and offered a humble apology to Claudia and Arya. Washio had genuinely believed Frederick was a great match for Claudia, handsome, around the same age, capable, and from a wealthy, prestigious family, unlike himself. His own words made him feel a bit down, and as he closed his eyes in frustration, a soft noise drew his attention. When he opened his eyes, he was startled to see Claudia right in front of him. Leaning in close, Claudia told him she didn't like it when he spoke so harshly about himself. Washio was surprised by her sudden proximity, and even more surprised when Claudia expressed that his self-criticism hurt her. She then insisted on a meeting after class as an apology. However, with his wallet already taking a hit this month, the likelihood of that meeting happening was slim. As they debated whether or not to take a walk together, they completely overlooked Arya still sitting in the room. Arya sat at the desk, fuming silently at the wall, still stewing over Frederick's lack of apology for his earlier comments. In her irritation, she didn't even notice that Claudia had managed to snag her favorite teacher right under her nose. In the student counseling room, only Washio and the monster girls remained. Washio, feeling the weight of his exhaustion, took a deep breath and warned them about using magic outside of class. Despite understanding their reasons and the situation they were in, he had to enforce the rules. The girls, knowing this well, bowed their heads and promised not to break the rules again. As break time was ending, Claudia prepared to go to her afternoon classes. With a sweet and slightly sly smile, she reminded Washio about their planned date. At that moment, Washio regretted making the promise, but there was no way to back out now. Understanding this, he could only give a resigned, somewhat broken smile. The rest of the classes went smoothly without any problems, so Claudia was able to prepare for her meeting without any stress. This time, she decided to visit a clothing store to pick out a nice outfit. After trying on a beautiful skirt and a fine outfit, she stepped out of the fitting room and asked the store workers if the outfit looked good on her. Fortunately, she had nothing to worry about, as the clothes fit her perfectly. She looked so stunning that other girls envied her appearance, and she caught the eyes of many men, including Washio. Washio, though he didn't mean to, found himself admiring Claudia's beauty. When Claudia noticed his gaze, she felt a surge of happiness, thrilled that she had finally attracted the attention of her teacher. She didn't care about anyone else's opinions and went straight to Washio. She immediately began asking him if her clothes looked good. However, Their conversation was cut short when Arya emerged, wearing a white top that highlighted her figure and a high dark skirt. She quickly asked Washio for his opinion on her outfit. The other girls began squealing with joy, praising her beauty, but Arya wasn't very concerned with their opinions. The only opinion she cared about was Washio's. To avoid upsetting Claudia and Arya, Washio said that both outfits were cute. This way, he managed to make both of them happy at the same time. When they heard this, the girls lit up with joy. As Washio stood awkwardly in the corner of the store, Claudia approached him closely, making him gradually step back. While Washio didn't find it unpleasant, he would have preferred to be in a different situation. Claudia, using her tentacle, picked up another outfit in a different color and asked which one she should wear. It seemed like she was hinting that she wanted his opinion and preferred to wear what he liked. Unfortunately, their peaceful moment was interrupted by the store employees at Whispering Boutique, who were openly discussing their contempt for Washio. They didn't even care that he could hear them. After all, Washio was just an E-ranked employee at the academy. Arya and Claudia both glared at the store employees with anger and coldness in their eyes. Even though they were rivals, they were united in their disapproval of the way their teacher was being treated. Though they wanted to confront the women about their rude comments, they decided against it. Instead, they decided to take Washio away from the store. Once outside, Claudia immediately said she was hungry and wanted to have some sweets. Arya agreed, saying she also wanted to enjoy some delicious crepes. However, it was clear that she wanted to spend time with Washio even more. As they walked through the market, Washio bought them sweet crepes filled with cream and strawberries, just as Claudia had asked. While they ate, Arya fed some of her crepe to Washio in a cute gesture. Claudia, meanwhile, fumed silently, irritated by the sight of Arya being so sweet with Washio. At the same time, a stranger with a bottle was strolling by. The old man came up to Washio, placing his hand on his shoulder, and asked why he wasn't at the academy. He quickly noticed that Washio was with students and recognized Arya from the time Washio had treated her at a restaurant. The stranger was talking a lot, stumbling over his words, which made it clear to Washio that the man was very drunk. The old man then suggested that Washio could get a promotion by using the monster girls to his advantage since E-rank was the lowest rank in the hierarchy. Washio remained silent, trying to ignore the drunken ramblings while watching the scene unfold. Claudia, meanwhile, happily focused on enjoying her food, listening to the old man's advice. The drunk man kept pressing, asking about his well-known colleague, Linoa. As he spoke, the monster girls' expressions suddenly changed, and they remembered the unpleasant magic teacher. Washio's expression momentarily darkened, and his eyebrows furrowed in resentment. However, he quickly composed himself and forced a smile, awkwardly scratching the back of his head. He explained that he wasn't interested in chasing after a promotion to E-rank and that he was content with his current position. He expressed that he was willing to accept the responsibilities of his choices. The old man felt sorry for Washio, lamenting that young people usually strive for perfection, often forgetting that Washio was over 40 years old. He continued to talk about his own youth and how he had given up hope for a promotion. The truth was that everyone underestimated him, but Claudia and Arya knew the real value and potential of Washio. Limnoa and Frederick had not been shy about making rude comments, but according to the townspeople, their remarks were quite cruel. Claudia and Arya found this situation far from pleasant, and came up with a plan. Their eyes sparkled with determination as they discussed their idea. Meanwhile, Washio was trying to finish his conversation with the old man quickly, hinting to the monster girls that it was time to move on. However, Claudia and Arya insisted that he step aside, explaining that they were having a private discussion he didn't need to know about. The old man continued talking to Washio about the hardships men faced, how they worked hard to support their families while trying to keep their lives fulfilling. He spoke about how everyone had to succeed through their own sweat and blood. While this conversation dragged on, Claudia made up her mind about her plan. She suddenly shouted that she had urgent business at home and ran off in the opposite direction from Washio. Arya, following the plan, also decided to leave, saying she would be happy to go on another date with Washio. With that, Washio was left alone, stuck listening to the old man's stories about his youth. As he watched Claudia and Arya move further away, he wished he could be as free as they were and do whatever he wanted. Unfortunately, he couldn't escape the old man, who called out to him, making him endure more complaints. The conversation with the old man seemed to stretch on forever, and when Washio finally managed to slip away, he felt a huge sense of relief. After such a long and challenging day, Washio slept deeply, though the night felt surprisingly short. The next day passed quietly and without incident. When the clock struck noon at the academy, everyone, including Washio, headed to the dining hall. Washio, however, couldn't enjoy his lunch in peace. As he chewed on his sandwich, he kept glancing around as if searching for someone. It was unusual for him not to see Claudia and Arya, who usually kept him company during lunch. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed on the marble floor of the dining room, getting closer. It turned out to be Arya. She approached his table and whispered a name, prompting a quick response from Washio. As expected, she had arrived just in time to break his long-awaited silence. Smiling warmly, Arya handed him a piece of paper and asked him to sign it. Washio took the sheet from her, curious about its contents. He asked what it was about, and after reading the document, he realized it was related to a financial obligation, which made him uneasy. He trusted Arya, but he didn't want to be burdened with lifelong loans. Adjusting her glasses with a touch of pride, Arya announced that the document was to officially create the Washio faction. The monster girls were eager to show the entire academy what they were capable of, but Washio wasn't keen on the idea. All he wanted was a quiet life and to simply work at the academy. The news about creating the Washio faction was quite a shock for Washio. He had simply wanted to avoid drawing attention to himself and live a quiet life. Now, Arya had added another problem to his plate, one he desperately wanted to avoid. Since he held an E rank, which typically didn't allow someone to lead a new faction, he explained the complications in hopes they would leave him alone. However, Arya just listened to his concerns, adjusted her glasses, and assured him it was more than possible. Today, Arya was playing the role of a mentor and was eager to explain her brilliant plan. She and Claudia had already met with the director and gathered all the necessary information. According to the director, there were 3 key requirements for creating a faction. First, the way they used magic had to be different from other factions, and they used ascension rings for this. Second, the faction needed at least 3 members, and thanks to Claudia's sociability, their team would quickly find more companions. Lastly, the leader of the faction must be at least a D rank or higher. To Washio's surprise, all these requirements were met. He had hoped that one of these conditions would prevent him from starting a faction, but when he heard about the promotion to D rank, he was completely confused. For 20 years, he had never been offered a promotion, so this new development left him baffled. This news shocked Washio, as he had been relying on at least one of these conditions preventing him from forming a faction. The promotion confused him even more, as he hadn't been offered a promotion in over 20 years, and now, out of nowhere, he had been elevated. It was then revealed that Arya had hinted to the director that she would leave the academy if Washio wasn't promoted. Washio could hardly believe Arya would go so far as to threaten the director, but the evidence was clear, and now, all that was needed was his signature on the document she had given him earlier. Arya leaned in close to Washio, enthusiastically pointing to the paper and showing him where to sign. With no other option in sight, Washio found himself staring at the contract, but doubt filled his mind. Hesitating before signing, he turned to Arya and gave a nervous smile, asking if it was really necessary to create a new faction at all. Despite his persistent reservations, Arya continued to listen as Washio explained his concerns. He pointed out that other factions were more than capable of teaching magic, and that she could actually learn more by interacting with other students. He urged her not to worry about him and instead focus on building relationships with the other professors and students. Arya struggled to contain her emotions when Washio, her teacher since childhood, suggested they join Lenoa. He argued that Frederick would gladly accept them, oblivious to the anger brewing within Arya. She gripped the edge of the table tightly, her gaze filled with resentment as she listened. Washio continued to remind her and Claudia that they had been too arrogant towards students from other factions. Despite his own arrogance, Washio genuinely believed Lenoa was a talented and exceptional teacher. Wanting the best for the monster girls, he neglected his own role and recommended Lenoa as their new teacher, though he failed to ask for their opinion. This oversight deeply upset Arya. Her frustration reached the point where tears welled up in her eyes, consumed by the thought that they were being pushed away. She struggled to maintain control, fighting the urge to storm away from him in anger. At that moment, Washio finally noticed the sadness on her face, realizing something had gone terribly wrong. Uncertain of how to remedy the situation, he stared at her with wide, frightened eyes, aware that his words had been too harsh. To Arya and Claudia, Washio wasn't just a good teacher, he was also a powerful magician, far superior to anyone else at the academy. Yet, despite the unfairness of being ranked as an E-class, he had remained silent and accepted the decision. Through her tears, Arya expressed her sadness at the injustice she was witnessing. The unfair treatment from others, combined with the insult to her favorite teacher, overwhelmed her. She could no longer bear the situation. Washio, caught off guard by her outburst, was unsure how to respond. He hadn't expected to hear such strong feelings from Arya. In that moment, the only thing he could think to do was apologize, but Arya didn't want apologies. Instead, she urged him to sign a document, which she intended to take directly to the director. Looking at her determined expression, Washio felt powerless to refuse. Memories of the past flooded his mind. He recalled finding Arya as a small, vulnerable spider in one of the destroyed homes. She had seemed so defenseless back then. Even during her time at his school, she had preferred to sit quietly in class, hardly drawing attention to herself. But now, Washio was confronted with a young woman who knew exactly what she wanted. She applied pressure, using every tool at her disposal to achieve her goals. Finally, Washio decided on what to say to her. However, before he could respond, Claudia came running down the hall, calling his name and waving an envelope in her hand. Without waiting for Arya, she rushed up to Washio, explaining that she had gone to his office and found no one there, only a white envelope left on the desk. Thinking it was important, she had hurried to deliver it to him. Washio took the envelope and glanced at the sender. It was from his landlord, the one who managed the house where he lived. Carefully breaking the wax seal, he opened the letter. The contents began with an apology, which was a bad sign. The landlord explained that she was growing older and had decided to pass the house on to her son, who in turn had asked Washio to vacate the apartment. The news came as a shock, leaving Washio frozen for a moment. Tomorrow, at nearly 50 years old, he might find himself homeless. The realization that he could soon become an old man without a home weighed heavily on him. He stared at the wall, unsure of what to do or how to find a new place to live. Meanwhile, Claudia seized the opportunity to examine the letter, reading its entire contents. However, she found no issues. Even if Washio were to be evicted, he would be provided a room in the dormitory if he accepted the position of faction leader. There was no real need for concern. The decision remained difficult for Washio, though, as neither option was appealing to him. He needed time to weigh the pros and cons. Fortunately, Arya stepped in at the right moment and resolved the situation much faster than he could have on his own. Arya wasn't interested in his reasons, whether he was motivated by the need for a place to sleep or something else. All she cared about was studying alongside Washio. Despite his initial reluctance, the combination of the housing dilemma and the sincere pleas from the monster girls, who were bowing before him, softened his resolve. Eventually, he gave in to their persuasion and agreed. As soon as he agreed to the idea, Arya straightened up, expressing her gratitude loudly for his cooperation. Claudia, however, couldn't understand why it had taken this long to get his signature. She glanced at Arya with a bit of disdain. Yet, it took only seconds for Washio's signature to appear on the document. The faction, consisting mostly of students, would have him as a supervisor, like a cultural advisor who checks in from time to time. Washio suspected his role would carry little responsibility. Nonetheless, he would receive a salary and the promised free accommodation. Despite this, the weight of past horrors flickered in his mind, the dead monsters killed after the war, whether they were the parents of the monster girls or experimental creatures. The responsibility for those lost lives felt like a heavy burden on Washio's shoulders. Even as he signed the document, he struggled to accept this new role. With a deep, weary sigh, he placed the pen down and closed his eyes, exhausted. Arya squealed with joy, imagining how their monotonous lives would now be filled with exciting adventures. But as Claudia carefully reviewed the letter, she noticed something amiss. Bringing it closer for inspection, she pointed out that Washio had signed his name incorrectly as Watsuo. The realization that he had done this on purpose made the girls slam their fists on the table in frustration. Washio, however, said nothing in defense and merely pondered his next move, aware that they had caught him in the act. Meanwhile, life around them carried on as usual. No one seemed to notice the destruction of the library tower. Deep in the dark basement, a strange egg-shaped glass chamber was hidden in a secret location. Connected by tubes to various machines, the chamber housed a creature being kept alive by the devices. An electronic sign on the glass displayed a warning. The creature inside had only 5% of its magical power remaining. Arya and Claudia, thrilled to have finally secured the authentic signature they had been waiting for, invited Washio to accompany them to the director's office. They wanted him to witness firsthand the approval of their new faction. However, once the director began reviewing the document they had submitted, he asked again why they had come. Slowly flipping through the pages, it became clear that despite their confidence in their plan, the administration had a different view. The document they presented wasn't workable, and though the director smiled, their request to create a new faction was denied. The rejection came as a shock to Arya and Claudia, who hadn't expected such a blunt refusal. In disbelief, they loudly questioned what they had done wrong. Overcome with frustration, Claudia lost control and, in her anger, grabbed the director by the throat with her powerful tentacles. The director, struggling to breathe, hoarsely begged to be released. Once freed, he coughed, and while clutching his neck, explained that the Academy already had a faction using the raising ring. Creating another one would be against the Academy's rules. He then glanced at Washio, implying that this information should have already been made clear to them. Realizing the situation, Claudia turned toward Washio in fury, upset that he hadn't informed them earlier. The Academy was structured in such a way that each school, association, and club was responsible for researching and applying magic through different methods. Many were known as magical research groups, each specializing in a unique area. For example, the Limoa faction excelled in vocal summoning magic, the Julius faction was renowned for simulated summoning using rings, and the Alba faction specialized in crafting potions with ritual incense magic. Each wizard had their own method of study to maximize their strengths. After receiving this brief explanation from the director, the trio left the office, uncertain of their next steps. They stood in the hallway, silent and unsure if there was any other way to salvage their plan. Even if another opportunity arose, it would take a long time to pursue. Washio was becoming increasingly aware that time was running out, not only for forming a faction but also for resolving his issue with the dormitory. If things continued as they were, he would soon find himself wandering the streets and possibly sleeping under a bridge. Desperate, he considered humbling himself and begging the landlady for an extension, hoping she would allow him to stay a little longer. However, it seemed unlikely she would agree, leaving Washio with clenched fists, hoping for another solution to his problem. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted by the sound of heels echoing loudly through the corridor. A man in a neat outfit walked by, smiling at Claudia. It was Frederick, behaving as if he were some kind of Romeo, showering her with praise and greetings. Washio was left confused, while Claudia cringed in embarrassment. Frederick, overjoyed by seeing Claudia, acted as though it had been a long-awaited reunion after an extended separation. In return, Claudia's expression turned to disgust, clearly uninterested in his sugary and deceitful words. As Frederick approached, he continued to lavish her with compliments, remarking that she always looked beautiful and that he was utterly captivated by her. Despite this, he didn't seem to notice how she was openly pushing him away. Frederick kept calling her sweetheart and asking her to stop being so shy, but Claudia refused to respond and continued to resist his advances. Meanwhile, Washio, unable to understand the dynamic between the two, unknowingly made things worse by commenting on how great they looked together. His attempt to lighten the situation was futile, as Claudia's anger visibly flared. Gritting her teeth, she begged him not to say that, making Washio realize he had overstepped. Apologizing profusely, he even bowed as a sign of genuine remorse. Arya, noticing his distress, gently patted him on the shoulder in an effort to comfort him. Despite her efforts, Washio realized he still had a long way to go in understanding a girl's heart. Just then, Frederick, remembering his original purpose, turned to Washio. He had a message from his teacher, Linoa. The message concerned the tower that Claudia had damaged during a previous incident. The tower housed the magical reactor belonging to Limnoa's faction, and due to the destruction, the reactor could no longer be used. Claudia, holding her head in her hands, recalled what had happened because of Frederick, though she still failed to see her own fault in the situation. Limnoa's message requested that they all go to the so-called Tower of Ghosts as compensation for the damage to the structure, which was now at risk of collapsing. Their task was to find a new magic reactor. Confused, Claudia listened as Frederick explained further. The Tower of Ghosts was an old building connected to the third floor of the main structure, a mysterious place that now held the key to repairing the damage she had caused. There had been unsettling rumors surrounding the third floor of the building for quite some time, so most people avoided going up there willingly. The few brave enough to agree to the idea usually fled in terror as soon as they encountered the ghosts. Frederick would often amplify the fear by creating a spooky atmosphere, claiming that real ghosts haunted the place. His tactic worked easily. Upon hearing about the ghosts, Claudia immediately became frightened and refused to entertain the idea further. However, Frederick remained unconcerned. Even though there might be ghosts, he believed that they couldn't harm a magician as powerful as he was. Besides, Washio was supposed to accompany them, so there was supposedly nothing to fear. But as it turned out, Washio had no desire to go there either. In contrast, Arya found the idea quite exciting. She clapped her hands in delight and smiled, eager to visit the tower as soon as possible. Eventually, it was Claudia's anger that caused the destruction of the tower, leaving them no choice but to comply with Limnoa's request. As they prepared to leave, Arya looked directly into Washio's eyes and confidently stated that 3 people were more than enough for the task. She led the way with assurance, while Washio's face reflected fear and despair. Despite his reservations, her confidence forced him to follow along to fix the problem caused by Claudia's outburst. Claudia, not wanting to be left alone with Frederick, clung tightly to Washio. When they finally reached the tower, her grip tightened even more as they approached the dreaded third floor. Washio, just as fearful of ghosts, felt the weight of his own dread. Arya, however, remained the only one with a clear head. She calmly assessed the tower's condition as she stood in front of the wooden door. Washio, knowing that he had no choice, grabbed the door handle. His hands trembled, desperate to finish the task and leave. Though filled with fear, he couldn't let it show in front of the students. He suppressed his anxiety and stepped inside. Meanwhile, back at the academy, everything seemed normal except in the magic classroom where Limnoa was. Frederick, Limnoa's favorite student, reported that everything was going according to plan. He had successfully sent the monster girls and Washio into the tower. Limnoa, pleased with the progress, praised Frederick for his efforts. Frederick then asked if Claudia would join their faction once everything went as planned. He began fantasizing about their future again. Their plan was shockingly simple and consisted of 3 phases. Knowing Washio was naturally weak and timid, they expected him to flee at the sight of the ghost. Limnoa would then appear unexpectedly, saving Claudia and Arya, which would win their admiration and lead them to join his faction. Limnoa believed in the genius of simplicity, and this strategy seemed perfect for freeing the monster girls from Washio's influence. Both Limnoa and Frederick were brimming with confidence. They saw themselves as superior to the rest of the teachers and students. No one dared to challenge their self-assuredness. Limnoa reminded Frederick that their faction's philosophy centered on intelligence. Frederick quickly added that wealth was another key element, and they both agreed that demonstrating their superiority over others was essential. They recited these principles in unison, almost like a prayer, smiling in satisfaction. Limnoa could barely contain his excitement at the thought of the monster girls joining them, while Frederick seemed even more fanatical, laughing and cheering at the idea. He was eager to show Claudia the greatness of the Limnoa faction. They were determined to gain the attention of the Academy's most powerful beings, doing whatever it took to attract the monster girls to their side. Limnoa, secretly harboring resentment, believed Washio was unworthy of the honor of teaching them. He had long targeted Washio's position and saw this as the perfect opportunity to restore things to their rightful order. Meanwhile, Washio, Arya, and Claudia made their way deeper into the tower, eager to complete their mission and leave the crumbling building behind. Claudia felt a sense of relief being alone with Washio, as the enveloping darkness provided a perfect cover for her hidden intentions. With a mix of excitement and desire, she pushed him gently to the floor and leaned in closer, her breath becoming heavier with each passing moment. All she truly wanted was to kiss Washio, to bring her dreams to life. Until now, she had been constantly interrupted by others with their endless problems. But today, she was determined to take a risk and lay everything on the line. The soft caresses of Claudia's body challenged Washio's self-control, forcing him to resist the overwhelming urge to give in. She was intentionally teasing him, driven by recent events that had led her to this moment. No matter how many times Washio requested her to move away, he never received the distance he desired. Claudia reveled in the closeness, eager for a positive response from him. Little did he know that what began as an ordinary visit to the tower would unfold into something unexpected. As they stepped into the tower, Claudia was taken aback by its fragility. The building seemed to sag under its own weight, several floors were missing, and the ceiling was gaping open to the sky. The walls were rotting, and the structure barely resembled a ruin. It was hard to believe that anyone would be sent into such a precarious place. The atmosphere was unnervingly dark and foreboding, even in the daylight. This pervasive gloom spurred the group's urgency to locate the magic reactor for Lin Noah and return to the academy as quickly as possible. Claudia, feeling overwhelmed by fear, chose to stay outside while the others pressed on. As they approached the entrance, a sudden scream pierced the air. Claudia had seen the door swing open on its own. She had always harbored a deep fear of ghosts, and even the faintest sound sent her into a trembling panic. As they stood there, a chilling draft swept through, as if death itself were exhaling upon them. In contrast to Claudia's terror, Arya remained remarkably composed, though a soft whisper grazed her ears from behind. Meanwhile, Washio struggled to steady his nerves. Just as he attempted to calm himself, a ghost appeared, creeping too close for comfort. It shouted for everyone to leave the tower, startling even the steadfast Arya, who hadn't anticipated a ghostly voice. Without fully grasping the situation, Washio and Claudia turned and dashed down the hall, abandoning Arya to face the spirit alone. Realizing the danger, Arya attempted to call them back, wanting to explain about the ghostly presence, but her words fell on deaf ears. In their frantic escape, Washio inadvertently stepped on a hidden button that activated a concealed mechanism, a trap designed to ensnare the terrified. With no knowledge of how deep the trap descended or what awaited them below, Arya rushed to assist her friends. Washio, gripped by fear as the ground vanished beneath him, instinctively pulled Claudia down with him. A cry of despair echoed in the smooth, dark pit, where there were no ledges to grasp for safety. The prospect of their imminent demise loomed large, but the smooth stone below offered no solace, and the terrifying height promised little hope of survival. Fortunately, Arya sprinted forward and managed to catch them just a few meters from the ground. Using her web, she urged them to remain calm and avoid sudden movements that might cause the delicate strands to fray against the edge of the opening. Any erratic motion could risk her grip as well. Although she possessed the strength to support several people, the trap unexpectedly closed, severing her web. The revelation of hidden dangers lurking in the old tower filled Washio with dread, leaving him anxious about his own escape and concerned for Arya's fate. In the midst of a tense situation, he decided to rely on Claudia's power to break free from the web that ensnared them. However, Claudia was not in the best of moods. Feeling uneasy, she momentarily froze, and when left alone with Washio, her instincts as a monster girl began to take over. Overwhelmed, she lost control of her actions. He pleaded with her to restrain herself and resist her primal urges, explaining that these instincts were merely her feelings and actions preceding her thoughts. Unfortunately, she struggled to grasp his words, repeatedly asking him to clarify. All she could manage was to assure him that everything would be fine. Washio recognized the impending danger. When she finally broke free from the web, she lunged at him like a predator stalking its prey. Claudia was convinced that they were destined to marry in the future, and she didn't want to postpone her feelings of passion. Her words frightened Washio even more than the eerie presence of the ghost lingering in the room with Arya. Having never contemplated the idea of a wedding, he continued to resist her advances, but Claudia's strength was overwhelming. He realized he needed to muster more mental fortitude to escape her grasp. Hoping to divert the conversation and distance himself from her, he found that she was relentless that day. Their lips were perilously close to touching when, in a moment of sheer panic, Washio began to bang his elbow against the stone wall. To his surprise, the walls of the tower were fragile and could not withstand the pressure. With a loud crash, they created a hole, and both fell through into a brightly lit room. For a brief moment, Washio lay on the ground, dazed from hitting his head, while Claudia surveyed their new surroundings. Fortunately, neither of them was seriously injured, allowing them to continue exploring the underground chambers. It soon became apparent that they had stumbled into a laboratory, which left them skeptical about the reality of their situation. They noticed a girl encased in an egg-shaped glass chamber, her mechanized body completely unresponsive to the commotion they had caused. Suddenly, an alarm blared, announcing that there was no remaining charge, leaving the automaton inactive and signaling that they had only 1 minute before self-destruction. Panic surged through Claudia, who instinctively wrapped her arms around Washio in fear. Caught in the rising tide of panic, Washio suggested they escape as quickly as possible. The container housing the girl, connected to numerous tubes, posed a significant threat not only to their lives but also to the unsuspecting students outside. He rushed toward the nearest door, only to find it locked. Now they were truly trapped, with no escape in sight, as the only exit in the room stubbornly refused to budge. Washio attempted to kick the door open with all his strength, but it refused to budge under the pressure. The situation became even more urgent due to the relentless countdown that echoed around him, a sound that could not be silenced. It was essential to remain calm in moments like this. Keeping a clear head was crucial to avoiding panic and achieving success. Recalling some comforting quotes helped ease his nerves, a stark contrast to Claudia, who was growing increasingly frantic. After managing to calm her down, Washio turned his attention to the glass container that was making such a racket. He hoped to find some clue or instructions on how to operate the power device. Everything seemed automated, yet he felt that an instruction manual must exist somewhere. His instincts proved correct when he approached the nearby table and discovered a worn magic book. The frayed pages indicated that its owner had consulted it frequently, and had likely left the tower long ago. Claudia was taken aback when he mentioned the magic book, but Washio promised to explain it to her later. The text was written in an indecipherable language, forcing Washio to spend precious time trying to decode it. Even though he struggled to translate more than half of the words, he managed to grasp the essence of the spell. Now, all that remained was to test its validity on the container that held the girl, who was in imminent danger of destruction. In a moment of curiosity, Washio reached out to touch the mysterious object. Instantly, a vivid image of a massive door flashed in his mind, suggesting it led to a powerful ruler. Meanwhile, a creature with a skull instead of a head observed the scene intently. This being had been watching since Washio began filling the container with magical energy, desperately attempting to break free from its shackles but failing each time. As the tension hung in the air, the system announced in a calm voice that the information regarding the restoration of the automaton would soon be updated. This news brought a sigh of relief from Claudia. However, as the magic transferred to the robot, Washio felt nearly depleted, unable to resist her anymore. Despite simply following the instructions from the magic book, Claudia couldn't help but applaud his skills, reaffirming his title of Golden Eagle. This nickname, bestowed upon him 20 years ago, filled Washio with discomfort. He requested that she refrain from using it and instead call him by his usual title, Teacher Washio. The accolade stirred up memories from 2 decades ago, leaving him feeling humiliated once more. Yet, just as Claudia praised him for his achievement, he found himself recalling the moments when she clung to him. He quickly dismissed these thoughts, knowing they could lead to complications he did not wish to face. Shifting the conversation, Claudia inquired about the magic book, eager to learn if it could enhance her abilities. She wanted every detail about how he had saved them from the explosion, which only reinforced her belief in the book's power. Claudia was eager to return to the academy, her anticipation palpable. To avoid overwhelming her with technical jargon, Washio began explaining that the magic book was an ancient artifact. He admitted that he had never seen one in person, but he speculated that it contained a wealth of ancient magic. However, he explained that to unlock its secrets, one must first learn the language in which it was written. Even though Washio successfully cast the spell, he struggled to translate the text literally. While browsing through outdated diagrams, he stumbled upon an old note that piqued his interest. At the same time, Claudia cheerfully examined the spell and proposed that they make the magic book the central focus of their Washio faction studies. To pursue this idea, They needed permission from their leader, placing the decision squarely on Washio's shoulders. Despite Claudia's eagerness for a positive response, more urgent matters demanded their attention. The container holding the girl began to gradually open, and the magical energy Washio had used to save himself was enough to recharge the robot, causing it to awaken. As the robot opened its eyes, its first question was about the whereabouts of its master, who had inexplicably left the lab without her. As expected, neither Washio nor Claudia knew him, prompting the robot to call out his name repeatedly. Once reactivated, the robot searched the room for her master. She apologized for sleeping for so long and expressed her desire to resume her master's research now that she was active again. At that moment, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place for Washio. He realized the note was intended for the robot, and he promptly handed it to her. Stepping aside awkwardly, he braced himself, already aware of its contents. The note revealed that the owner had to leave sooner than intended because his magical powers were too low to continue working with the magic book and the robot. Yet, he fondly remembered the days spent studying magic with her. He acknowledged that his time had run out and expressed his wish for a wise heir to care for her and continue writing in the magic book, exactly what it was designed for. Although the robot lacked the ability to express emotions, Washio could feel her sadness. Nevertheless, she expressed gratitude for the note and for being awakened. To show her appreciation, she unlocked the door for them. However, she requested that they leave her alone in the container and keep their meeting a secret. With her master gone, she felt her existence in the laboratory was meaningless, and according to her programming, she needed to return to sleep mode and wait for her heir to return. As she closed the lid, she fell silent, leaving Washio and Claudia in shock. The encounter with the strange robot and the magic book stirred many emotions within them, but Claudia still had lingering questions. She didn't understand why Washio hesitated to become the robot's master. The robot's sad story tugged at Claudia's heartstrings, and she felt compassion for leaving such a beautiful being to languish in the basement. Determined to help, she felt that the robot deserved better. In contrast, Washio felt utterly powerless. Despite Arya and Claudia frequently calling him a genius with extraordinary magical abilities, he consistently denied it. In reality, he was merely a shy biology teacher, far from heroic deeds. Every time he spoke, it seemed he was intentionally downplaying his talents. Once a hero and a genius from another world, he had seen his reputation and life shattered by receiving an F-rank designation. The master's words about adding new pages to the magic book alongside the robot resonated painfully with Washio. Yet, he felt a growing sense of responsibility stir within him, compelling him to reconsider his position and the potential impact he could have on the robot's future. With every step they took, Claudia and her companion moved further away from the laboratory where the robot was kept. Claudia struggled to accept the idea that Washio would abandon the robot in the cold basement. After all, maintaining the robot's functionality required periodic injections of magic, a secret known only to her. Despite the robot's hot-tempered and annoying nature, Claudia was determined to find a way to achieve her goal. Washio must have had his reasons for leaving the robot behind, otherwise, he would have surely freed her at any cost. As they walked, Claudia couldn't shake the minutes spent listening to the relentless ticking of the clock in the room with the robot. Those moments filled her mind with thoughts of the note she had found after the robot awakened. She had shared only the portion intended for the robot. The first part of the note had been addressed to the finder of the grimoire. The author had no way of knowing who would come to claim it, whether a young man or an older man. However, he had cautioned that the book resting on the table was known as the black leather grimoire that keeps silent. This book was one of the 7 ancient artifacts, and the girl beside the robot was its guardian. She had a sacred duty to entrust its use only to someone worthy, a person who would wield the book for good and safeguard its secrets. The former owner of the grimoire was acutely aware that his time in the laboratory was limited. His magical powers had diminished significantly, leaving him unable to continue working with the robot. In this moment of acceptance, he decided to entrust everything to the next generation. Reflecting on his journey, he felt no regrets. In fact, the days spent studying magic alongside the robot were some of the most fulfilling of his life. Each day, he awaited her awakening, filled with hope. As time passed, he grew older and gradually lost his abilities. Eventually, the day came when he had to leave her behind forever. His life was coming to an end, and it was time to pass the responsibility of the laboratory to a new master. His only wish was for his heir to create a new chapter in the grimoire alongside the keeper. He encouraged them to trust her, for that was her purpose. After analyzing the man's last will, Washio realized that it was clear the legacy was not about magic. A book containing 7 relics was a weighty responsibility, far too heavy for a simple biology teacher. He understood there were many individuals far more suited to this task. With this thought in mind, the protagonist took the grimoire in hand and made his way toward the stairs, ready to move forward. Claudia found herself torn as she contemplated whether to leave things as they were. She repeatedly glanced back at the lab, feeling a deep sense of empathy for the robot. Like the robot, she was unaware of the full contents of the note, and this left her feeling sorry for it. Claudia had always been a diligent student, faithfully following Washio's guidance without question. However, today felt different and Washio was not himself. Despite this, she continued to urge him to take on the role of the robot's master. Having just awakened, she felt the heavy pull of sleep returning, yet her desire to help the robot burned brightly within her. Unfortunately, she lacked the magical power necessary to keep it alive. In her desperation, she was even willing to kneel before Washio, pleading for him to agree to assist the robot. It needed someone to extend a helping hand and rouse it from its endless slumber. Washio had previously helped many, including Claudia and Aria, but something had shifted within him. She couldn't pinpoint what had changed since their last parting, and she remained in the dark about what was troubling him. To her, he would always be the kind and reliable teacher she admired, always ready to support someone in need. Her thoughts echoed in Washio's mind, compelling him to reflect on Claudia and Aria. They had been hinting for days that he was embarrassing himself with unfounded accusations. At last, he recognized his own vulnerability. Without the assistance of his students, he struggled to make even the simplest decisions. Washio smiled awkwardly as he reflected on his thoughts, expressing his gratitude to Claudia for her assistance. Despite his discomfort with the title of master, he knew it didn't really matter. Claudia had a knack for creating various nicknames that he found endearing, especially when interacting with the robot. She took his hands and led him downstairs. As they descended, Washio felt compelled to apologize for his perceived helplessness, believing himself unworthy of teaching such talented monster girls. The time apart had taken a toll on his morale, dragging him down into a state of despair. He had grown accustomed to a life of servitude, but recently, memories of freedom began to resurface. Perhaps one day, he would find the strength to discuss the events that transpired during their separation. For now, though, they needed to hurry to the laboratory. Claudia's smile brightened at his words, and her unwavering support reassured him. She was more than willing to wait patiently for his decision, even coming up with a new compliment for him. The awkwardness of their conversation only added to the charm of being teacher Washio. Upon entering the room where the keeper was held, Washio stood uncertainly beside her, recalling the last lines of a note he had often rewritten. The former owner had sought to apologize for the lies he had told, burdened by his regrets. The robot had a heart, enabling her to understand human emotions, though her cold body and lack of overt feelings set her apart. Washio recognized that the news of her master's death had undoubtedly saddened her. In his final lines, he implored the next heir to give her a new name, shower her with love, and offer her a sincere smile, gifts he had been unable to provide during his lifetime. He had intended to spend his last years with her, sharing the wonders of the human world, but death had intervened too soon. Gently, Washio opened the container housing the robot and took her hand, urging Alice to awaken. He envisioned this morning as one filled with light and hope. His first suggestion was to go outside together, but her programming prompted her to ask for a new name. Thinking she might not like the one he had given her, he suggested another. However, she declined, leaving him with no choice but to rewrite the data for her current identity and confirm his role as her owner. As promised, Claudia swiftly facilitated this process. When Alice began to refer to him as master, it was a reflection of how she had been programmed. To Washio's surprise, during the data update, she introduced him as Washio-sensei, which became her official designation. The information was processed quickly, confirming him as her new master. With a cheerful demeanor, Alice expressed her delight in meeting Master Washio and eagerly exited the container. Washio could only sigh, wishing that the title attached to him felt unnecessary.
Alright, that's a wrap for today. If you enjoyed the video, hit like. And if you're new here, sub before the algorithm forgets I exist. Drop your favorite moment in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.